So welcome back. We are now going to get ready for our afternoon panel. And I am extremely excited to be here with this great group talking about growth, agility, and flexibility, the photo studio of tomorrow. And today I am joined by four incredible thought leaders, and we'll be discussing best practices, challenges, and opportunities around developing and evolving an optimized, efficient, and agile studio. I think we're going to cover a little bit of everything from studio evolution to communication and collaboration, creativity, budgeting, data, samples, and more, as much as we can get into in the time we have today. For any of you just joining us this afternoon, I'm Claire Carter-Ginn, and I'd like to welcome our fantastic panelists. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their roles. So I'd ask that everybody turn off mute and bring on the camera so we can see your beautiful faces. And for once, we're not in the Brady Bunch square. I don't even know what to do. But I am going to start with the woman who's on my far left here, and that is Colleen Moore of REI. Would give us a little introduction, if you will, Colleen, please.
Thank you so much, Claire. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with such other smart, strategic, and awesome people from the industry. I am Colleen Moore, Senior Manager at REI's Media Studio, and I oversee the teams that both execute our content production and acquire content from our partners. Thank you.
Dynamite. All right, David, will you go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm David Brint. I'm CEO of SpinMe. We're the world-leading provider of workflow management and hopefully expertise, partnering enterprise clients globally to improve the workflow.
Great, thank you. Aly, will you go next?
Hi there, I'm Aly Macleod. I oversee photo studios for Saks.com, overseeing everything from studio production, photography, styling, and image edit.
Great. And Mark, you and David probably are tied for latest point in the evening where you two are, but Mark, will you go next?
Of course, thanks, Claire. Lovely to meet you all. My name is Mark Stocker. I'm Senior Creative Manager at the Very Group based in Liverpool in the UK. So yes, it's 7:45 p.m. at night. I've done my day's work and I'm here now with you guys. So it's fantastic to be on board.
Ed. We are grateful. We are so grateful.
So yeah, as Senior Creative Manager, I look after a lot of studio teams from planning through to samples, through to digital reproduction and design teams. The Very Group is UK's second largest online retailer. We're a broad department store covering everything from fashion through to home, through to elec. So we have a real vast array of products launching each month and challenges that they bring.
Oh, I can imagine. Man, I love a department store, but that's a story for another day. So why don't we get started? And we'll go big and not go home. Let's talk about what we've learned in the last 18 months. I mean, we all know this could take up an entire day on its own, but I'd love to hear from you all about the biggest takeaways, what they have been, and hopefully, or some of the ones that have been the most impactful for you over the late 18 months. Aly, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, and I think everybody will chime in because I think we were just talking about how we've all experienced the same or very similar things. I think prioritization was a big one for us throughout the pandemic, which, you could apply to growth as well as a pandemic situation or a natural disaster. So thinking about how our resources all of a sudden became truly limited and how do we have to approach prioritization differently, which was changing on a constant basis. So that was certainly something that leveraging frequent and constant communication with our partnering teams to really understand what the true priorities are, as well as thinking a little bit differently about how you approach those things. Really looking at what the true value in the work is. When you start to lose bandwidth, you have to really assess what's required and what's necessary and where the value truly lies with your teams.
Mark, I know this is something that we had talked about as we started prepping. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've experienced in the last 18 months? As you said, the Very Group is a department store and you have so many elements moving at any given time, and it must have been very exciting and potentially challenging to have so much change in a short period of time.
Absolutely. I think humbling is the word I'd probably best use when we talk about this, because we talk about tech, we talk about we could have the best systems in the world, we've had the best processes in the world, but it's all down to people. I think the reality of realizing that we've got to keep people safe, we've got to keep operations going, we can't afford to lose sales. And I suppose it shone a spotlight on the photo studios and the actual importance of the day-to-day operations. So yeah, and just to echo what Ali was talking about there in terms of the resource, it's vital. Making sure we've got a loyal resource base that we can pull from, but we want to keep them safe and secure. So we've had to significantly reduce the volumes through the studios. We've had to spread everything out, be real space inefficient, if you like, and then ask a lot of people through what was a very trying time. You know, there have been personal issues to deal with, and at the drop of a hat, we could be isolating. So it's ensuring we had a backup plan and a contingency each time. We managed to pull through, but as I say, it's humbling to see that the people kind of stepping up and, you know, the pride they had in the roles that they did, whether it be from receipt of a sample or actual taking the shots, booking the models, etc.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I think we all had contingency plans in place anytime you're with a big organization for certain things. And in New York, we had certain contingency plans. And I think Aly knows what I'm talking about, that our legal departments put together, but nobody could ever foresee what we went through in the last 18 months. And as I said in my introduction today, we've really had to just be scrappy and figure it out. And I do think that there's been some exciting things that have come out of that. And Colleen, I want to ask you about that, especially because you guys were in the process of opening a studio right when the pandemic hit and you went into a shutdown. So you not only were putting the processes into place, you actually had to figure out how to get the work done in a situation where you were still just figuring out how to get the work done, so to speak.
Yeah, it was challenging and also fun, I think, because of what Mark just said, like finding out your resources, how dedicated they are, and how creative your teams can be on like the strategy and the way that we execute work when we have to think differently and think outside the box and do things in a way that probably was not inside of our contingency plan previously, right? So I think that allowed that experience of us moving into a new studio, finishing construction and build of a studio through a pandemic, all while we were also onboarding a brand new software to support our production. It was too much change than any team should have to bear the brunt of dealing with at any one time. But we all decided to do it in lockstep with each other and in close collaboration and partnership. And I think communication was the true key to our success there. And figuring out how to have that communication and the cadence and style, what's meant for a meeting, what's meant for Teams chat, who are the people that are here in person, who are the people that we need to include virtually. There is a lot to just like kind of figure out and, like you said, get scrappy with and determine as we go. And I think we figured out how to be successful there. And the learning and the takeaway that I'm the most proud of is that we continue to look at everything we're doing in this lens of how do we plan, do, check, adjust, right? So just because we plan to do this and then we do it doesn't mean we shouldn't check in afterwards and make adjustments. And if you have daily meetings for 3 months and then you find out maybe you only need those twice a week, then make that adjustment, right? And give your team, I think, the mind space that they need to think at that strategic level so that we can really insert that agility and flexibility into everything we do and keep our tennis shoes on so we can pivot when something else happens.
Yeah, we may not be working in a studio the size of the Amazon warehouse, but it feels like it a lot of days, that's for sure. David, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what you saw with your clients and where you are in the industry in terms of what the big learnings were overall, because I'm sure there was some commonality and there were a lot of differences too.
I think it was really interesting, and there were two aspects. It was different for bricks and mortar retailers who also have online to those who are dedicated online. So I had annual reviews last week with two large department store retailers in the UK, Harrods and Selfridges. And when we were doing the review, it was quite interesting because not only did they go into COVID with the stresses and the strains, but the business was needing more product to go online because the bricks and mortar wasn't selling. So the pressure was to actually shoot more products. Then you combine that with affecting everybody was how many people can you have in the space? Can they get into the space? Are you shooting from home? How do you set that up? And the key for us there and the learning that we found with them was the more that you can organize the processes to be automated, allowing the superb staff, as Colleen was saying, to step up and have the freedom to make the difference, but taking away the manual tasks and the information being live and up to date so that they are focused on what they can do to make the difference. And that, to me, has actually speeded up what was already happening, because we all know that globally online is growing. During COVID, it's grown quicker than it would have done without COVID, no doubt. So it's just speeded up that process of that movement to having an online, stronger online production needs. And the one thing I know is that even with COVID hopefully disappearing, the growth will continue. There'll be a need for more imagery of more products. So it's exponential, the growth will be continuing. So strategic thinking is what's come out of it. People have got to start thinking strategically about what are the processes, what are the way that we need to work to achieve our goals in 2-3 years' time, not today.
Yes. Yes, and that's a great segue into obviously something that I care about, since I talked about it in the intro today, is really moving from being tactical to strategic. We have to stay tactical and agile and be flexible, because we really day to day don't know what's going to happen. We know we've got to shoot a lot of black t-shirts and some scarves, but bigger picture, what can we look to in the future? And Mark, I'd like to turn to you for this, because I think one of the things I find so interesting is, as you said, as all of these companies are going through digital transformation, whether they be boutique retailers, department stores, medical information, pharma, the whole kit and caboodle, everybody's having to make that shift. You guys are in a unique position because you were already there. And yet that doesn't slow down the sort of the need to be forward thinking as you're figuring out what your strategies are for moving forward. So I'd love to hear from you on how you guys are looking at strategy for the next 6 months to 6 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of love what Dave was just saying there, and Colleen, about that step back. I think the real positive that's just come out of the last 18 months is the fact that we've, in some kind of way, shape or form, have found some headspace. I think innovation doesn't stop. And I think whilst we were in a fortunate position during the pandemic, being an online retailer, which it almost forced the customers to shop with us. It's now ours to lose, because the competition's heating up, and we're fully aware of that. So, we've got some great functions at the very group. We have a customer experience team. And we really start to use the data of how the customer shops, and what problems do we need to solve to start thinking ahead. So we know returns isn't always going to be an issue with more people shopping online. How do we solve for that? How do we get the right size, fit across as a digital retailer? We put some innovations live on site, working with brands like Nike, River Island, Levi's, and we've seen some great results on changing that model. So we shoot on an size 14, size 8. You have to forgive me, I don't know the US sizes of that.
I'll let it slide.
Yeah, that's cool. but what that means is the customer can bring to life for the customer what they're purchasing. But innovation's great, but without visibility and prioritization, to Aly's point at the start of all this, you can't become strategic. We need to know and be able to secure what are we buying, how do we present our brand to a customer, and then how do we plan to sell all that, flattening down the peaks, securing all the resource and talent. Because I don't know about you guys in the States, but right now talent is at a premium. There seems to be this revolution in employment. We're losing people left, right, and centre, and we've got to attract and retain that talent. The only way you're going to do that is have your workflow, have your strategies in place. So it's vitally important, but we need data, and we need that feed of data, and we need to know what we're selling, when we're selling it, more importantly, how are we going to sell it? And then we can plan and we can strategize.
Yeah, I agree. And Aly, I think you guys are in a unique position because, Saks is such a, okay, it's one of my favorite stores. But anyway, that aside, point being that you guys are, I'd say at this point, I assume both equally digital and brick and mortar, because that store experience has been so important to you. So in terms of the strategy from, leadership on down, how are you guys looking at that in terms of the photo studio and moving forward with being strategic in the next few years and the next few months?
It's interesting, Claire, because we actually went through a transition mid-pandemic. So mid-pandemic, when closures started to happen and we had to start thinking differently about accomplishing all the things we just talked about, we were the only store open as our brick and mortar were closed. Recently, we went through a transition where we have become a separate business to our brick and mortar stores. So we're still the same umbrella, but we have separated and essentially have become a pure player, which is really interesting because we're now working with partnering teams where we have been digitally focused for our entire careers at the studio. We're now working with partnering teams that it's day one on digital. And so we're talking a lot about education and understanding the digital focus strategy. And as Mark said, working toward getting data behind decision-making or prioritization. Those are all really important things, but I think the key is really understanding the strategy first, and then being able to get ahead of it, working with your partnering teams, communicating, understanding what you need from them, why it's important, and what the risks are if that flow of information doesn't come to you.
Absolutely. Colleen, something that I'd love to ask you about in terms of strategy, because being a company that is very focused on community and building community and also being very inclusive, that has to be a big part of your strategy. So you're not just thinking about how do we get the black t-shirt shot, you're also thinking, and I think Mark mentioned it too, you're thinking about size inclusivity, you're thinking about ethnic diversity, the whole kit and caboodle. Has that affected the studio strategy as you start to build out what you're doing for the next 6 to 12 months?
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point, Claire. And, our mission is to make the outdoors more accessible for all. So it's also our responsibility to make sure everyone shows up in our work somewhere, and we really truly represent all. And I think historically, there's been a pretty big challenge that I'm sure we can all commiserate on with getting hands-on samples in a variety of sizes, and getting those samples in our hands at a point in time that's early enough to make an impact to the actual work and the marketing materials that we all know have deadlines. So I think going back to the points that Aly and Mark made, breaking down those silos with your other departments and having that strategy across at the business level and at our co-op level, I think has been a really great piece of work, body of work that our full co-op has taken on this past year. And I'm partnering with, members in merchandising, in our digital departments, in our own brand to find out how we get more size variety in our samples earlier on. We've taken it upon ourselves this past year to just go ahead and order a variety of samples right out of stock. So we're lucky. You mentioned earlier, we moved our studio right into our distribution center. So our back door literally is where all of the samples live, which gives us, huge advantage in terms of speed to market and how quickly we can get those samples in. It's really unleashed a lot of opportunity there in how we show up in the marketplace and how we truly represent all sizes. And as a former punk rocker, it's also my mission to break any rules that exist. So, those rules of we shoot this size sample or that size sample. I'm like, no, let's shoot every size sample. Petite, extra small, tall, all the sizes that Mark said that I don't know because I speak American size. Just everything and anything out there, I think. And to your point, that inclusivity and diversity goes beyond just sizing, but it goes to gender, it goes to race, it goes to style. right? It goes in terms of our location work to region and how we represent other regions across the country as well. So definitely a mind shift over here and a lot of continued work to expand there.
I
And I
think an
think-
interesting, I'm sorry, Claire, I was just
No,
going to add
please,
to
go
that.
ahead. Mhm.
I think an interesting alternative to that as well is when maybe obviously two different types of businesses here between Colleen and I, where we think in the fashion industry, very reliant on sample, very reliant on working ahead of launch or ahead of collection availability. So really fighting for those samples that are made in one size. So how can you scale that, and how can you have representation and scale the business without having to shoot every size, and looking at alternative, like technology alternatives, in order to capture that?
I actually love
Yeah.
the fact that you've kind of solved a massive problem there, Colleen, in terms of plugging your studios into your distribution center. I know we've chatted before about this, but I think there's definitely something to crack there. The brands that we work with daily, they're stopping the sampling process. We know that when we do get a sample as well, they're not always the production line samples. So it's always caused us problems. I mean, if there's one thing we have seen over the last 12 months is the amount of reshoots that we're having to do, because what we've received isn't what the customers are receiving. So we're breaking down silos, working with the guys at our DC. But unfortunately, our distribution center it's newly opened, but it's 2 hours down the motorway. So it's not easy. And we've built a distribution center which is highly automated, the latest tech, right next to Amazon, comparable with Amazon, but because it's so technologically advanced, no one can walk in and pick anything. So it creates another problem. So it's definitely something we have to crack. But leading on to, I think what we've seen over the last year or so that we will take forward is about shooting more relevant content. You know, for years we've shot in studios. We've been forced to shoot at models' homes, at influencers' homes. And what we see is a real uplift in sales when we put them shots on our site. Now, I get initially it might be a bit disruptive, which is why you'll see the uplift. But it's certainly something that we as a business are going to take forward, and we've started to write into our kind of brand footprint.
I think that's really interesting. I think the other thing that's really we found coming out of the last 2 or 3 months, coming out of the whole COVID experience, is that knowledge is power. And for all the clients we work with and the prospects we're talking to, it's about accuracy of information and up-to-date information. And what people are wanting to know is things like, when are the samples coming? When are they going to arrive? What do I do with those samples? Where are they going to be? And it's all about how you can plug a system into your PIM, because you can ask your merchandise team to give you information, but it's not their priority. So you're rarely going to get quick, accurate responses from your merchandise team. Whereas if they've entered the orders, which they've got to do into a PIM system or a product management system, and then you can link that to your studio workflow, and then you can link it to the post-production automation. You can link it to the DAM system for where the imagery is going to go, or Ampliance, or Scene 7, or whoever you may be using to post that imagery. And you can automate those processes, because then you've got accurate information. Then you can start to plan strategically and or tactically, as long as you've got those systems in place that's doing that automatically for you. Because in most of our client prospects we talk to, one of the biggest challenges they have is sample management, and knowing when those samples are coming in and how and what to do with them when they do arrive. And all of that affects, exactly as Colleen was saying, speed to site. And the biggest and most important difference that we always say to our clients that we can make with you if we partner with you is about speed to site. Because if you can shave 1 day off the time it takes you to get onto site and get an extra day's sales, in a business that we're all in, that gives exponential growth.
Absolutely. I think that something that we all talk about a lot these days is the single source of truth. Is there a place or a person, but preferably basically the hub of the wheel that has all the information so that everybody is getting the same information. My friend Michael from Manor Solutions calls it the democratization of information, which is for so long, individual divisions have had their own information. Yeah, the merchants have some information, digital or e-com has some information, creative has some information, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. But to find a way to tie it all together so that you can constantly have the latest information. I mean, something that, you know, when you go out to shoot, understanding that you may have a, you know, a t-shirt in 20 colors, but you only have one of them, which one, or you only have two of them, which one are you going to shoot? Or how deep did we buy into something? This is something that we dealt with a lot at Michael Kors when we went out to shoot. We may only have 5 of one handbag, but we bought in, you know, 500,000 of this other handbag. I understand from a styling standpoint which one we want to capture for social, but which one do we want to capture for the website? Which one needs to be the lifestyle image? And this actually may tie into something else that I know we had wanted to talk about was, you know, the way that we're thinking about content creation, budget allocation, and the investment in content creation. Something I had said earlier, and I would love to hear from you, is are you seeing a change in the budget allocation for creating content? Or are you really, again, going back to being scrappy, figuring out how to do it with what you have existing and just being more efficient and optimizing teams and best practices and workflow, et cetera? Anyone want to pipe in on that one?
I'll kick something off. I think, forgive me if I start going into my own lingo here and you don't understand what I'm talking about. I'll do my best. I think I opened up at the start with the value of the photo studio, I think, due to this pandemic. And certainly from our side of things, it's made conversations a lot easier. When we're talking M&R spend, when we're talking budget allocation, I think we're feeling more valued than we've ever felt before. We're having less challenges. And going back to, again, my previous point about relevant content, I think if you can kind of crack what content type is right, and we know the more relatable the content is after what everyone's just been through, so whether it be capturing them real moments, whether it's models at home, that kind of stuff, the reality is it's cheaper to produce. We don't go on fancy location shoots. We used to shoot in South Africa, we used to shoot in the Algarve, we used to shoot over Europe. We're now proud of the cities and the homes that we live in, and we're using that and we're getting the best out of that. And it's not to drive costs down, it's because that's what the customer wants and that's what the customer expects. But inadvertently, it's helping us manage our budget a lot savvier and then focus on those important pieces and hopefully become more of a strategic brand and less a brand that trades. And we shouldn't really be putting that massive buy in front of the customer when there's certain products that you need to kind of dial up because of the style, the lifestyle aspect of.
I think that's really interesting, Mark. And if I can interject on that for one moment, I think the studio was seen in many businesses as a cost center until probably 18 months ago. And now it's seen as the shop window. Yeah. And there's a very influential person in this industry who was the founder of weve, who turn over about 4 billion a year online. And Ilan Ben-Haim once said to me, he says, David, never forget, people don't buy products online, they buy pictures online because that's all they can see. So the power of the image and the photograph is what's absolutely crucial to what you do. And weve went from 0 to 3.8 billion in 11 years online. So people don't buy products online, they buy pictures. And it's in our own interest, all of us, to make sure that the boards of directors, the VPs, everybody understands the importance of quality as well as efficient, because we must never forget the word quality, and quality is relevant to each business and to each brand. But the right quality or correct quality of image is absolutely crucial.
Absolutely spot on. And I think you know, something that we constantly face into in our industry is everyone's a creative, right? Everyone's got a subjective opinion on what a brilliant image looks like. And I think you know, we've got to empower our guys to remove that subjectivity and own it.
Yeah, agree totally.
Yeah.
Is anybody using data to support their content creation or their creative?
Yeah,
And if,
I'll dive in here. I
okay,
think we're starting to use data to support content creation and justify budget, right? And I
yes,
think kind of tagging to what David just said, it's a picture is selling your product, but sometimes it's a video, and sometimes it's a picture in studio, and sometimes it's a picture of this product on a person, and sometimes it's a picture of this product on the person out using it, or maybe it's more, right? So I think for anyone that doesn't know, REI Co-op carries a wide variety of products that do a wide variety of things. And I think that's some of the complexity that we deal with and how to represent each product in the e-commerce space, but then also in print and editorial uses. So it's like a matrix almost of like content types and styles across like end use needs, and what fits where, I think, is something that we're starting to get more data to influence, but there's definitely some opportunity there for more information and more data to make those decisions upon. We really respect feedback from our members, so that to me is the best kind of data we can get is what our members actually want to see and expect to see and need to see in order to click the buy button, right? And did they have all of the pictures that they needed, to David's point, to be able to make that decision? Or if I'm buying a hydration vest and I'm a runner and I couldn't see how that bladder might fit into the backpack, maybe I'm not confident enough to make that purchase online, and now I need to go into the store, right? We want to try to solve those problems proactively. So I think there's a lot of room to grow there, but we're starting to scratch the surface, and I'm real excited to learn what works.
outstanding.
Definitely.
And I think listening, oh, sorry, Mark, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, we use a high level of data, so we can look at the big moments. What we can't really do is drill down to the detail, because you've got to get the right volumes of traffic through. And when you talk about the number of products, it's very difficult to do that. But if there's experimentation, we will use data to analyze it. We will assess performance and we'll agree to invest or not, or continue. And we have teams behind the scenes in our digital experience team that kind of analyze that. And we've got our data scientists. But I want to get to what Colleen's just said around what is the right thing to put on that shot. How do we analyze the value of a model asset versus a still life asset, and the styling as well? I'd love to get to that.
Yeah, that's something, Mark, that we are also just sort of scratching the surface on and working with our tech teams and our product teams to truly A/B test. I think we've done some user testing in the past, which is great, but not scientific. So if you can marry the two and have some true data, even if you're going against the decision, right? If you're going against the data, you're making a conscious decision as a team of leaders or a C-suite to say,
Absolutely.
the data says X, but we feel strongly that SAC should represent Y. So we're going to do it anyway, and we're going to invest in that. But at least the decision making is coming from an informed place.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Aly, you're in a unique position because you also have, there is that elevated feel and the elevated content that you need to create. So while there's some that maybe user generated content or more of the I don't want to, the authentic shoot at home or, lifestyle moment on the street, that's fabulous, but you still have to deliver this high-end experiential moment for that guest who is looking for the high-value fashion couture item. And how has that been in terms of when you're carrying price points that vary so wildly? Has that driven some of the strategy decisions you've made in the studio? Or
Yeah, for sure. And we've all lived through kind of the peaks and valleys of, depending on who's running your company at the time, what your focus is. So we've certainly run through the gamut of cost-cutting initiatives and good and fast, good enough and fast. And I think we're falling back into that true luxury space, especially as Saks.com is separating from the other businesses. And I think we talk a lot on my team about, you're selling handbags that are upward of $3,000-4,000. This is not a quick, you shop on Amazon, it might be a VPI, might not be the best quality, but the thing you're buying is $13.99. You're not too worried about it. You're quite happy to click and transact. But if you're about to drop a handful of dollars on a alligator handbag, you really want to know what you're getting. You want to see everything. And to Colleen's point, every facet, every use, every styling that could be possible, but you have to balance that with, now are you just adding too much? Is there value in that view? And again, I think there's places where we might just make a creative decision because we feel strongly that showing that detail is beautiful and functional and good information for the customer. And some of it is just because we feel if we want to shop, that's what we're going to want to see. We want to be able to pick it up virtually and see the detail. So I think it depends on your price point. I think there's businesses where you can have some strategies that work really, really well because you're not facing that price point or that customer transaction being such a big deal.
Fantastic.
I think the ultimate thing here is, sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
I think the ultimate thing here is we talk a lot about the price point or the product, but actually the most important aspect here, I believe, is the consumer. And it's about the type of consumer, because you might be selling a $2,500 handbag to an 18-year-old, or you might be selling it to a 70-year-old. And they're going to probably want to see different images and different aspects because of the way they buy it. And I think we must never get away. What we've got to get further and closer into is not just the product itself or the price point, but who is the consumer that we're targeting with this product? And then what imagery do we require for that consumer? So when you say, or Mark says, or Ali says, or Colleen, we might shoot it on different clothing on different size models. It's the same here, I think, with certain products. You think, well, I need certain images that might appeal to a 70-year-old on a luxury brand. But then if I look at Balenciaga, where I live, it's mainly on 16 to 30-year-olds. And you need to make sure it's modeled in the right way for them because they don't want to see a 70-year-old wearing it. So I think it's really interesting where we're going at the moment.
Well, I think that ties right back into the data conversation again, right? And we call it voice of the customer, but so that's a combination of customer commentary, but also our insights team going out and getting us information back, hopefully at a regular cadence of who our customer is, how are they shopping? And you're right, there's a mix, and how do you style and how do you present the merchandise online?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think pre-pandemic, I think we got into a great place with our customer kind of mindset at the very group. We knew who they were, we knew how they shopped, and we knew what we were buying. Back in the old days, and we created a piece of work around segmentation to truly understand why we were buying the products we were buying and what was the end use of them products. So we started to offer different segments depending on what the product was. So if it was, our products range from our own basics range, which could be a £10 top, to a £2,000 jacket or handbag. So a real broad set of products, and we started to tailor that to the end use, to the customer, and who would typically buy that. And data was telling us it was the right thing to do. However, that incurred bigger costs on models, bigger styling costs. They were all human elements, not tech. And I think it'd be great if we can get to a place in the future with tech. And we've been having some fantastic conversations with up and coming tech providers on how can we solve that solution without hemorrhaging money.
Yes, and I think we're, in a lot of ways, tech isn't there yet, but we as the users are all clamoring for it. It's the automation, it's trying to figure out sizing and diversity. It's being able to show one item on, as a shopper, I would love to see one item. I want to see lots of views, and then I want to see it on a lot of different people. Colleen, to your point, you and I probably had a very similar look in our teens, and I think that making sure that I can see how something is styled in different ways. And Aly, to your point, I think actually Chico's is an incredible case study right now because you have this younger generation. Mark, David, if you don't know, Chico's is traditionally for a more mature audience, and I'd say Gen Z has suddenly picked it up as the cool thing to add into your mix. So suddenly kids are wearing these colors, you know, it's very South Florida, Naples, it's a lot of bedazzled items, and it's not something I would ever see them pick up, but you see a lot of influencers picking it up and then carrying it with the Balenciaga bag. Oh my God, all my clients would be like, you can't pronounce that, but anyway. So point being, I think we're seeing this. There's always been a blend of high and low, but David, to your point, I think going back and really finding out from the consumer, whether it's utilizing data, whether it's looking at, you know, click through, how many images of the bag are people looking at, which ones are they utilizing, which ones are they looking at? You know, if they don't want to see the detail of the inside pocket ever, nobody ever clicks on that. All right, maybe we don't need that this time, but really listening to that consumer and being aware, as Aly said, the voice of the consumer and understanding what they want instead of assuming we know what they want. And not that we don't have enough other things to be thinking about at this time, but I think that at the end of the day, we're here to service the consumer and make their lives easier. And how can we be doing that more efficiently and with greater creativity and giving our teams a chance to shine without increasing costs. So no small feat that we're all up against. We've got only a few minutes left. There are definitely some questions, but I thought what I'd love to do, if anybody's interested, is kind of get, if you have one piece of advice for the audience out there today at this event, what would you tell people about how, you know, one piece of advice for moving forward in terms of their photo studios? Does anybody want to offer something up? Otherwise, I'll pull some questions.
I'll start. That's okay. My only piece of advice would be to try and stop for a moment thinking about today and think about what you're going to need to be doing, producing in 2 years' time and how you're going to do it.
Great.
I'll tag on.
No, go on, you go first.
Sorry, Mark. Yeah, I'd love to tag on because I think my comment really plugs in well with what David just said. And I think as you're thinking strategically, also thinking how you will tactically implement there, and going back to Aly's very, very early point on prioritization, how do you build levers into your system so that you can adjust based on how the priorities adjust without having massive waves or massive impact to your team? So that long-term thinking, but also setting up your systems to be able to react and support the changes that come along the way. And be open-minded, listen.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I think tech is an enabler, and it's a fantastic enabler, but if there's one thing we've learned is take that step back, focus on people, and really kind of empower people to take ownership. And I think that's where the value of people comes then. I think in a studio environment, which is very much time bound, every minute of the day is planned out. How do you kind of free people's minds up? And I think that's where tech comes in. But then, you know, almost going old school, daily stand-ups, talking more. You know, Aly, communications come out a lot from what you talked about this afternoon. Sorry, nearly tripped up there. But we underestimate it. We take BAU for granted, and we're almost like machines. And I think having a breath, taking a step back, and real challenging yourself in terms of what you're doing and what you're taking ownership of to move forward. Let's get rid of the button clicking and let's use the thinking and the power of the mind.
I think as well as people leading studios and leading studio teams, we have an immense responsibility to level set expectation, educate our leaders and our C-suites, because strategies and sales are top of mind, and they're going to come like a freight train, and you're not going to be able to stop it, but you need to be able to arm your teams appropriately and make sure that we don't get run over in the process.
Well put. Well put. Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much to this group. I have to say, this has just been a really, really interesting panel. I don't know if any of our panelists have time, if anybody was heading to the lounge afterwards. I know I have a date with Bradley from WWE after this, which will be a fantastic event starting at 4. But if any of our panelists have time to head over to the lounge, I know there were some fantastic questions we weren't able to get to. And hopefully people will be able to come over and ask you a few extra questions. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone for your time and your insights. This was a really interesting discussion and insightful, as I had said.